Hello and welcome to my FlossTube channel. I'm Jean Farish and I am especially glad to be doing this today. It has been way too long. So those of you who are my regular viewers know that I had 2 events back to back that I packed into a single trip. But the week before that, during the time that I knew that it would be hard to make any more episodes, I came down with what my doctor now calls the uncommon cold, that it's gotten to the point where so few people come down with a cold because we're so much more careful about hand washing and other things that can spread those cold germs around. And since we're not doing a whole lot of that, it's not the common cold anymore, it's the uncommon cold. And I just felt sort of yucky. So didn't make a FlossTube video that Saturday before I actually left on my trip. Those cold germs sort of hung around for a while. There's an old saying that a cold will last 14 days or 2 weeks, whichever comes first. And that certainly applied to me. So I made that trip up to Boston, sort of fighting the cold a little bit. And just to give you an idea of what it takes to do the behind-the-scenes sort of things for these kinds of events, here's a quick view of the back of my car as I was leaving. So in that car, not only is there my personal things for the 3-week trip, but also all the class materials and what we call swag for the Canada New England cruise that I was headed for, as well as all my class materials and my merchandise for being a vendor at the Hershey retreat, which is actually officially known as the Fall Getaway 5. So anyway, so that last week or so before the trip is just a lot of behind the scenes prep. In fact, here's a shot of my kitchen table as we were putting together the swag bags for the cruise. And then, of course, I got on the road and made my way up to Boston and sort of hunkered down in my hotel room, I'm sad to say. Didn't see any parts of Boston and just knew that what my goal had to be to get well enough to get on the ship. And then my secondary goal was to be well enough to teach my classes effectively on the cruise. So that's kind of where I was. So I really just sort of did a lot of self-care and just didn't do much of anything while I was in Boston. So then we got on the ship, which was wonderful. I'm just going to tell you, needleworkers who go to retreats and events must just be the nicest people in the whole wide world. We just always have just fun on our cruises because of the personalities and just the people getting together. We already know when we get on the ship that everybody has at least one thing in common, that is a love of needlework. And then very quickly people find out that they live near each other or maybe grew up in the same town or raise a certain breed of dog, and just all the different little connections that we start making. And so many people tell me, and it happened again with this cruise, that they just kind of met like their best friends within the community that we gather together very spontaneously and without any sort of plan in mind. But it happens every time, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that it's because people who love to travel, love to do needlework, kind of tend to go on these things, and then they find out that they just really enjoy the company of all the other people. So a couple highlights of the cruise. Originally I thought I would do some interviews and kind of gather some material for future FlossTube episodes. And then once I was there and felt better, which took me like 3 days, I just kind of got into this very laid back, let's enjoy the experience. I didn't even take as many photos as I normally do. Um, so, but I just want to share a few highlights of the cruise. And this is not in any particular order because I really want to start with what my takeaway of just the coolest sort of experience was sort of, I don't know what the umbrella term is, but the sort of art that comes up in urban areas in just very unexpected ways. So maybe somebody will leave a comment and tell me like, what's the proper terminology for this type of art. But this is in Quebec City. These are old buildings. And what you're seeing here is like a silver foil application on, I think, I didn't stop and count, but it's at least 5 buildings, 2 on either side of this very hilly street. And then the one house that you see facing us, or the building that you see facing us. So just to give you an idea of how amazing this is another shot that's kind of taken from the side, so you can better see how the just the impact of this. And I think that part of my takeaway from this was the planning that it took, the math, the graphics, just the whole thing is just absolutely astounding. And you kind of had to walk back down the hill a little bit till you got just the right view to get the impact of the whole design. So I don't know, I just found that amazing. Those are the sort of memories that will stay with me for a long time. And one of my other great memories is the memory of great food. I love lobster roll. And it's probably my favorite way to have lobster. And I could have eaten it every day, I think, and not gotten tired of it. But yeah, so you have to see the pictures of the lobster roll. We had incredible weather. In fact, in this picture that I had a friend take of me on the bridge between Kennebunk and Kennebunkport, because the sun was so bright. It was in the middle to upper 70s every day that we were on this cruise, which was just absolutely fabulous. Another fun takeaway for me was time spent at the iconic home of Anne of Green Gables. Gardens were beautiful. Anyway, yeah, it was just a really spectacular cruise. And of course, on the ship, we did a lot of stitching. I had fun in my classes, and I have to tell you again, just the whole kind of atmosphere of cooperation and friendliness certainly extended into my classes, where my students were very understanding of how limited my left hand was, still is, sadly, but that's kind of just my reality. And of course, when I planned my classes for this trip, which, the planning took place 18 months ago, I had no idea that I wouldn't have the dexterity in my left hand that I really need to be able to teach effectively. But again, like I said, my students were incredibly compassionate and understanding and helpful. And I think everybody had a good time. Let's see. Casual stitching on the ship was great. Again, we had, there's a public area. It was not just for us, but there's an area where like you have a whole bank of windows, which means that you have great light, but also you're just not missing any of the scenery as you're sitting there stitching, which was nice. And then after the cruise was over, it was on to Hershey, Pennsylvania, like I said, for the Fall Getaway 5, which was organized by LinAnn Events. And of course, there's going to be a Fall Getaway 6. So get on their mailing list and find out about these events, because they are just a whole lot of fun. Again, great group of people. I enjoyed my classes and enjoyed the chocolate. It really is an amazing experience. I mean, honestly, you smell chocolate everywhere you go. Yeah, so that was that was just a very different pace from the cruise. Very laid back, had lots of friendly conversations with people, and just really, really enjoyed myself. Then it was time to come home with the, I really think packing is more fun than unpacking. I tend to leave that till I'm tripping over things and I'm constantly saying, no, where is such and such a thing? Oh yeah, it's in my suitcase. Well, I guess I better get it unpacked. I admire people who come home from trips and immediately unpack and get everything done. That's not me. That is a skill and a habit I need to work on. A couple weeks ago, Katie W. left this on the comment section of the Floss Tube. She said, what is the benefit of stitching in the well? And could you explain what makes a sampler a sampler? Okay, let's start with stitching in the well. When you stitch in the well, then that's when you are sort of stitching on the flip side of the way people commonly stitch, whether it's an embroidery hoop or a Q-snap, or in the world of needlepoint, stitching in a frame. Also, I guess scroll bars as well to an extent. But it basically is when you stitch so that, say, your embroidery hoop edges are above the surface of your stitching. Your Q-snap round cylinders are above where your stitching is, as well as same thing with needlepoint. So the benefits that many people refer to, one is that your hands tend to touch the surface of the embroidery that's going to show later on, that you're touching that surface less often, so that when you're holding it, you have more contact with what's going to be the back. So that's one benefit. Another thing I find that's just sort of a side effect benefit, not something I would choose. I wouldn't choose to stitch this way just for this one little benefit, but just sort of like a little added bonus. And that is if you drop something, it lands inside the well. It doesn't just fall off, whether it's scissors or your needle or whatever. So that's a benefit. A lot of people find that when they're finishing their threads, that it's easier because when you flip it over and you're finishing your thread, you don't have any obstruction because it's flat. And so that to me is probably one of the biggest benefits, especially if you tend to stitch close to the edge, say, of an embroidery hoop, or really any of these things. When you get close to the edge, if the well is the back of your fabric, then finding a way to get that needle under existing stitches, you're kind of running into a barrier. And so when you're stitching the other way around, there's nothing in your way. So I would say that's probably the greatest benefit. But bottom line with this and any of the things that we're talking about here is to do what makes you comfortable. And, it's the sort of thing, try it. I mean, if you don't like it, then you don't have to do it that way. It doesn't cost anything to try it. So that's kind of my take on that. Now, the question of what makes a sampler is a whole lot more complicated. And you will see definitions that vary greatly. In its purest form, a sampler is a sampling of stitches. But I want to say that in my experience, that pure definition is probably the one that applies to the fewest number of samplers that are readily identifiable as being samplers. So using a more generic, popular approach to this, a sampler typically has a border, it has a verse, it has an alphabet, it has little elements, motifs that are elements. That's probably the most general definition of a sampler. Now, within the world of samplers, there are different types of samplers, and you will see a lot of these terms that are thrown out all the time, like Quaker samplers are very distinctive. Scottish samplers are very distinctive. Bristol samplers are very distinctive. So each one of these have their own little set of characteristics. And I'll speak to the Scottish sampler, because I have a Scottish sampler in my group, and that's the Janet Irving sampler. Typically, lots of reds and greens, a building, and in my experience, an area where there are, it might appear to be random sets of initials, but it's actually a genealogy. So like on the Janet Irving sampler, this row of letters are actually the initials of the people in her family. So those are the things that make it a Scottish sampler. And I will leave it to other experts. In terms of the world of samplers, there are dozens of people that are far more knowledgeable about what makes a sampler than I am. But she asked me, so that's my answer. Now I have a question for you and all my viewers. What makes washing and ironing your finished needlework so anxiety riddled? Now, before I go any further, let's leave this conversation defined by washing and ironing fabric and threads that are washable. I'm sure there'll be comments about other things like overdyes and whatnot, and that's fine. I'm not going to police it. But what I would really like for you to do is just focus on, if this applies to you, what makes washing and ironing your needlework of washable fabrics and threads so scary? Because I see that that's one of the things that there are so many questions that are asked about that on social media, and expressions of anxiety so often. So, but let me just tell you two things I would never, ever, ever do to my needlework. One is take it to the dry cleaner for pressing. Not unless they guarantee you that they're going to only press it from the back and they're going to put it on something that's soft enough that your letters will not be, that your stitching will not be flattened. So that's number one. I personally would not take my needlework to the dry cleaners for the purpose of having it pressed. And then the second thing, other than a few exceptions like tablecloth, napkins, breadcloth, things that are made to be used and therefore need to be washed, I also would never put my needlework in the washing machine. And I guess that's the thing that perplexes me the most. I don't know why people have such an aversion to hand washing stuff. It's not that hard. Maybe it's time for me to do another video expressly about washing and ironing your needlework. I did it years ago and have referred to it a couple of times. But maybe it's time to do it again. So tell me where does your experience intersect with anxiety when you think about washing and ironing your work? And let me know so I can put that all together and we'll do a video just about washing and ironing needlework. A little postscript to that. I do recognize that Aida is harder to iron than linen. It's harder to get the creases out of it. I personally don't think it's impossible, but because I don't spend as much time stitching on Aida as I did back in the 80s, I'm going to spend a little time with that personally and see what I can do to get creases out, because I just don't think can be that hard, but we'll see. I I really should wait and say, because I might find out that it is harder than I think it is. But I don't remember it being that hard when I stitched Naida exclusively in the 80s. So we'll see. This next topic is not intended to be part of a series, but I am sort of jokingly calling it when your stitched piece doesn't turn out to match the photo, part 2. A very, very dear friend of mine posted recently her extreme disappointment of a piece that was just so far different from the photo that she was really thinking about just she was just going to stop stitching it, start all over again, abandon it, whatever. She was pretty distressed, and I think she had every right to. The particular project in this case was using over-dyed floss. Now, you may already be thinking, over-dyed flosses vary greatly from one batch to another. Part of that is the nature of the beast. And so when I finished reading this post and looking at the photo, I immediately just kind of went into problem-solving mode and said to myself, what can a stitcher do to not find themselves in that pickle? What are some preventive steps that you can take? And the only thing that I could come up with is this. And it's only going to apply if you can do your shopping in an actual needlework shop. It's not going to apply if you don't have a stash built up and you can only order online. So here's what my thinking is, what I think the process would kind of look like and feel like. So you've got this chart that you love, and you're looking at the photo, and it's got your color key, and you're in the shop, and you pull out all those colors. The next step is to look critically at it, and in this particular piece, there was one major focal point. So look at that focal point, look at the flosses that are called for the chart, look at the flosses you just pulled. In your critical eye, are you going to get the results on that photo from that set of floss? Invest yourself, invest your time, have some stitch confidence to say that you are capable of kind of figuring out whether or not these skeins of floss are going to get this stitched result. And if the answer is no, then go back over to the wall of floss and say, the one that's called for is way too dark. So what's something in that same color range that's lighter, that may look more like the photo? And that's kind of the process that you have to take. And, it's the sort of the good and bad of stitching with over-dyed floss, the good and bad of designing with over-dyed floss. You get some gorgeous, gorgeous effects with it. And I would really hate to see it go away. I'm certainly not advocating that. But it also comes with the downside of it being so hard to get colors, consistent colors from one batch to another. So the designers, the only thing they can do is to stitch with what they have in front of them. And the only choice you have as a stitcher is to stitch with the inventory that the shop has at that time. So don't give up on it, but just become your own advocate and participate in the problem-solving process of saying, are these the colors, are these the skeins, the specific skeins that are going to get me this result? And if the answer is no, or I'm not sure, then spend some time figuring that out. Now, as I said in the beginning, this isn't going to work if you live in the back of beyond, you don't have a big stash of that brand of over-dyed flosses, and you are relying on the mail order source to fill your order. In that case, I'm going to go back to something I said many, many, many months ago. In fact, it may have even been a year or so ago. And that is, if you are a person who does the majority of their shopping online, you need to build a relationship with the online order filler. And there are many, many companies out there that are the big ones that do a lot of mail order, but there are also shops that put a lot of effort into keeping their customers happy with their mail order. And I'll just give a shout out right now to one of the people that I think does a bang up job with this, and that's Karen Owen down at Cross Stitch Cupboard. I have been in her shop when she's been on the phone with people, that she's been FaceTiming with them and saying, okay, you want something with daisies. This is what I have in the shop right now. And she will take her phone and go around and like show what she's got. She's the sort of person that would say, you want to stitch such and such a project. Let's take a look at those colors. So I'm not going to say she's the only shop owner who does that. I think there's lots that do. And I will welcome people making comments and mentioning shops that they've gotten that kind of service from, and I'll be happy to share that in an upcoming episode. So, don't be a stitch victim. Don't just say, oh, well, this is just the way it is. Be proactive and build this kind of relationship so that you can enjoy all your stitching. Anyway, that's what I want to say about that. An update on the scissor situation. First of all, I mentioned these cute little scissors a while ago, these little polka dot scissors, when I talked about that there are a lot of good scissors that are sort of, sort of funky, that are inexpensive. And I really forgot, frankly, how inexpensive they are. I now have them in my Etsy store, and they're $5. So I kind of like stitching with things like this just for fun. They're good scissors. I wouldn't put them in the category of great scissors like the ones that I'm getting from England. But they're just kind of fun. So I've enjoyed just having them in my stitch bag for those projects that you kind of like when you want a theme going. And I'm stitching something that's makes me think of pink polka dots, and so I have a pair of pink polka dot scissors in that bag. The other thing that I am putting in my Etsy store are, I love these little scissors for traveling. Just dropped one. And what I'm doing is putting, you get one each of the 3 colors as just a single purchase. So those are in my Etsy store now. I have placed my order for more of my favorite scissors from the source in England, from the manufacturer in England, and they are in the process of filling that order. I have gotten a partial, so I'm going to be sending out the people that are on the top of that pre-order list will start getting theirs next week. And then, this will make just the perfect Christmas present. So, leave a little note from those that you love that, there are people that they love you too, and they want to give you things that you're really going to enjoy. So why not just leave a little hint? These are the scissors I'd like to have, and this is where you can get them. Another way to be proactive. And the last thing I want to talk about is something I've just recently become aware that is a real thing, and I thought I would share it with you. And that's decision fatigue. Did you know that that's a real thing? So I started just doing a little personal research, not going crazy with it, but like the American Medical Association has a little blog thing about it, that it's always been there. But post-COVID, as a population, we tend to be more affected by decision fatigue than ever before. And basically, decision fatigue, and I hope I'm giving an accurate definition here, is the process of getting more and more tired of making decisions throughout the course of the day because of all the thousands of decisions that you are making in the course of that day. So like if you charted it out, it's like, you have so many decisions that you're making, and you start out the day, you're not tired, and you have all the energy to really evaluate and make good choices. And as the day wears on, you wear out and you become less and less effective in making decisions. And so this is a very real thing. And that is why the old adage of sleep on it becomes important. And as it applies to our needlework, this is what I want to leave you with. Most of us tend to do our stitching in the evening. Not everybody, but I think many, many people do the majority of their stitching in the evening. Work is over, kids are in bed, you're sitting down finally, relaxing with your feet up, and you find that you've made a mistake. And, your immediate reaction is having to rip it out, or I'm going to give up, or, in my opinion, almost the worst thing, I can work around it. And those decisions that particular decision tends to cause all other problems later on. Now, that's not always the case, but in my experience, I find the more I try to work around a mistake, the more mistakes I'm going to make and the harder it is. At any rate, bottom line I want to say is, when it's toward the end of the day and you find yourself boxed in with something that you see as a mistake, don't do anything about it. Wait until the next day when you're not as tired. First of all, you might find that it's not a mistake. It's just an optical illusion. It looks like a mistake, but it isn't. How many of us have ripped things out and then found that it wasn't a mistake at all? Also, I think that when you start ripping things out and you're tired, that's when you're more likely to encounter the tragedy of cutting your ground cloth. So again, just put it off. This is when it's good to put things off until you're not suffering from decision fatigue, when you can look at things with a fresh mind. So decision fatigue is a real thing. It affects us in all of our decisions, whether it's grocery shopping or what to wear tomorrow for work, or whether or not I need to rip this out. And of those things, a decision about your stitching, you can certainly put off until the next day, and that would be a good thing to do. So before you start ripping out, sleep on it. I'll leave you with that thought, and I sure expect to be back next week. But I think the last time I said that, it was, I haven't even gone back to count. I don't think I will. It's been a while since I've been able to spend time with you, but I'm so glad to be back here, and I will see you next week. Until then, stitch happy, stay safe.